Hello, members! Welcome to our live stream program about Mexican artist Frida Kahlo. I'm Libba Beaucham, and today I will be guiding us through the art of Frida Kahlo, and then we are going to watch a special interview with Frida herself, portrayed by Diana Mancilla. Diana is a history educator and has studied Frida Kahlo out of her own personal fascination with her. So when I mentioned Frida Kahlo as a subject for a members program, Diana jumped at the chance to interpret her for you. And Frida will also be joined by our volunteer Carmen, who has worked with us on our Family Day activities. So I'd also like to thank Carmen for helping us today. Now, I don't know if it's happening on your end, but we have experienced a little bit of a lag with the stream. So just know if that's happening, the audio should be good, but do let us know if you're experiencing any issues. So before we meet Frida, I'd like to take us on a journey through her artwork. And Frida Kahlo is most widely known for her self-portraits specifically. She once said, "I paint self-portraits because I am the person I know best. I paint my own reality. The only thing I know is that I paint because I need to, and I paint whatever passes through my head without any consideration." And I think as we go on this journey through her artwork, you'll really see how her imagination comes to life in very surreal ways as she progresses. So here is Frida when she was a young girl. She began painting and drawing at a fairly young age and had a natural talent that over the years would be crafted and developed and progress. And this was her first self-portrait. This was created in 1922 when Kahlo was just 15 years old. You'll notice she has a cheerful yet relaxed expression. She's dressed as a young girl of her time and of her class would be, because she was from a family of some privilege, which you'll learn more about from Frida herself, but you can see her class represented in the nice lavender dress, her shirt with the puffed sleeves, her hair is styled as well, all a subtle sign of a life of some privilege. And this self-portrait was created when Frida was 19, now a young woman and in love. This portrait was for the young man she was courting at the time, and their relationship had soured a bit, in part due to her more non-traditional liberal beliefs. The young man's parents did not approve of Frida, and he was sent off to travel in Europe and study in Europe, in part to not be influenced by Frida. In a letter to him, she said, "I implore you to put it in a low place where you can see it as if you were looking at me." And it's interesting to note, you can see that there are ocean waves in the background, perhaps suggesting the distance and the tension between her and the man she was in love with. In this self-portrait from 1929 is titled "Time Flies," and you see Frida Kahlo is staring directly at you, the viewer. She's strongly centered in the frame. Her expression is calm, and even her signature brow is painted in a way that resembles the open wings of a bird. And you'll also notice that there is a clock on the stack of books. The time reads 2:43, but historians are not exactly sure what the specific time's significance is. Above her head is an airplane in a northeasterly direction, another symbol of flying. And Kahlo is wearing a traditional Mexican garb, so Mexican clothing and jewelry. Her cheeks are rouged, which is a sign of healthfulness, and her hair is parted down the middle and pinned up in a traditional style. And Frida Kahlo painted Time Flies in 1929, the year she wed her husband, another celebrated Mexican artist, very famous, Diego Rivera. And his more traditional Mexican painting techniques seem to have inspired her, as she also incorporates traditional techniques by using very bold colors, simple forms, texture that you can see in this painting as well, and elements of traditional Mexican style in the way she is dressed. Now, the subject of this painting, Time Flies, perhaps that's talking about time flying as she is now married in a very happy time of her life, very exciting time. You can see that she's also wearing a white dress, so perhaps speaking to the newness and of this new life. And here she is in a painting painted by herself, of course, with her husband, Diego Rivera. And this was a wedding portrait of the couple after they were married. And the first thing you may notice is the stark difference in size of the subjects. Rivera was a tall and large man, but his personality and fame also makes him much larger than life. In fact, Frida's parents called Rivera the elephant, and Kahlo and Frida was the dove. So perhaps this is also being communicated. And Frida had a deep love for Rivera as both his companion and as a great admirer of his art. You see that there is a bird above their heads that's hanging with a hanging that reads, "Here you see us, me, Frida Kahlo, with my dearest husband, Diego Rivera." And you might also note the direction of Diego's head and Frida's head. They are not looking at each other, and they seem to have their attention in different places. There's also a stark distinction between Diego's European-style suit and Frida's more traditional Mexican dress. And that's perhaps noting that Diego had more worldly experiences as an artist and was accepted more largely in the European and American art world. And Diego, as you can see, he even has his palette and brushes with him, symbolizing his dedication to art. The tension in the portrait could be read as an unhappy couple. And it's true that later in their marriage they did have challenges, but something that was also really important to Frida was having a sense of independence. So we could also interpret this as a symbol of their independent careers and independent interior lives. Over the years, Frida's art would become more surreal and abstract and sometimes political. In this painting, she is standing on the border of Mexico and the United States, and she's dressed in an uncharacteristic, demure pink frock with lace gloves, a more American, more European, Western style. But you see that she also holds a Mexican flag in hand, as well as an unladylike cigarette. And the block on which she stands reads, "Carmen Rivera painted her portrait in 1932. Now, Carmen Rivera was the name that was often used in the newspapers when she was only described as the wife of Diego Rivera, who dabbled in painting as well. So I think this communicates the lack of recognition that she received for her own work. And you also see that she stands between a very drab depiction of the United States and Mexico. On the United States side, you see smokestacks labeled Ford, and it's also the smoke is also covering the American flag. While on the Mexican side of the painting, it shows ancient ruins, ancient Aztec ruins in particular. And death and decay would become a very prominent element of Frida Kahlo's later paintings, and you see it here as well. What she's trying to communicate, that really is to be interpreted by the viewer, but you can see that with both of these sort of decaying sides of her experiences in Mexico as she becomes a more recognized artist, and she is experiencing what it's like to be a Mexican woman in the United States during the early 20th century, what she's experiencing in America, seeing all of this industry. Now, it's also important to note that Frida Kahlo was a communist. So she had a specific ideology and probably a very specific point of view about America, about colonialism, about capitalism. So it's interesting to note that in this painting. Now I seem to have frozen. let me see if I can fix that for us real quick. All right, I hope that I am back. I think I am. All right, great. Thank you for letting me know. Chang Schumacher fan, thank you. So moving on a little bit further into her career, we have other types of paintings. She did many self-portraits, but she also painted still life. And this one is Still Life with Parrot and Fruit, and that was created in the year 1951, so a fair amount of years later. And during these years of her life, she did many of these still life paintings because she said that they were easier for her to create because she began to have many health challenges, chronic illnesses that she faced during her last years. So it's also interesting to note that while this is a still life, the prominent subject, the parrot, is not a still figure in real life like the fruit on the table. So it really is as if this is a painting, that this painting is a snapshot of a single moment. And while I doubt that a parrot was really there to be so still for her, that parrot might symbolize those her longing of home in Mexico, where she would have seen those types of birds. And of course, the selection of fruit she has is also reminiscent of her time in Mexico. Now, as I mentioned, Frida did experience chronic illness in her later years. This also meant that that this would influence her art. And one symptom that she had was a severe loss of appetite, and she was even force-fed by her doctor, and that is depicted here. So you can see it's kind of grotesque. And this is another good example of how surreal her art became later in life. It sort of reminds me of that quote that we talked about in the beginning of, this is what is inside her imagination, and how she sees her reality. So that really takes a stark shift later in life as she's dealing with health challenges. And also other types of challenges were with her marriage with Diego Rivera. It became more and more difficult when Diego would be traveling throughout Europe, traveling throughout the Americas, because he was very famous himself. He had other relationships which deeply hurt Frida. And in this piece, you can see that hurt as the tears are rolling down her face, and Diego is almost literally on her mind, staring off and not meeting her gaze. You can sort of think about that symbol of the mind's eye. Where is his mind? It is even on his head, it's not meeting our gaze. And he is elsewhere, as Frida is with us, the viewer, staring back with that pained expression. And you'll also notice that her hair is down near her neck, and it looks almost as if the hair is strangling her. Now, it's also interesting to note that while she was deeply hurt by Diego's affairs, she also had other relationships outside of her marriage with Diego. So their relationship was very tumultuous, a lot of tension, and of course, with both of them so dedicated to their art careers, you can imagine that that would also present a lot of challenges. How much time to dedicate to a marriage and relationship and the work that that takes. How much time it takes to dedicate yourself to your art. And with all of the time away that they spent, it was clearly a difficult experience for her. So let's see. I think we have one more painting. I wanted to show, let me, it looks like I don't have that slide. Let me try to grab that last painting for us, because I do feel that it's important. It's called Viva la Vida, Watermelons, and it was another still life of hers. So let me find that really quick, and I apologize for that, the error there. Got it right here. So I'm just gonna place this here. All right. There we go. So you can see in this still life, Viva la Vida, Watermelons. This was her last painting. It was in 1954. It followed complications from her having to have her leg amputated. And she chose to paint watermelons for their significance to the Dia de los Muertos, or the Day of the Dead in Mexico. And during this event, Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, watermelons were often used to symbolize connections to the dead or being consumed by the dead. And you can see that written in the melon itself is "Long live life," followed by her place of birth in Mexico, and where she would later pass away as well, and the date of the painting. So it's interesting that her last painting is the symbol of death, and yet it still says "Long live life." And throughout her really fascinating career, it's interesting that she did have such a strong connection to both the vibrancy and colors of the world. All of the still lifes that she had were many times things that had a very lively element with animals that were native to her country, Mexico. And there was also a lot of symbols of death and decay in her work as well. So she spent much of her time thinking about these things and feeling and noticing the things that she loved in life and that were really strongly connected to her life in Mexico. So now that we have, volume is very low. Let's see. Let me see if I can help you there. Test, test, test. Well, I apologize if the volume was a bit low, but we are now going to go into a video that the volume should be good on. So now we are going to go into our interview with Frida Kahlo, conducted by our volunteer Carmen, and I really looked forward to this. Diana Mancilla is a really excellent educator, and she even portrayed Frida at one of our family days last year, and got to share her art that way. So now we're going to learn from Frida herself, portrayed by Diana, about her life and more about her marriage with Diego Rivera, her inspirations, and that will conclude our program for today. So this will conclude our live portion, and we're going to go into that video. And I just want to thank you all for joining us today, and please enjoy this interview with Frida Kahlo.
Hi everyone, I'm Carmen, and I'm so excited to be here to interview Frida Kahlo today. Welcome, Frida.
Hi, Carmen.
So, Frida, to begin, what is your real birth name?
Well, you're going to be surprised. My name is Magdalena Carmen Frida Kahlo y Calderon, so we actually share the same name.
Frida isn't a typical Mexican name, so why were you named Frida?
Well, you're right. I, like the majority of Mexican population, I am a descendant of a blend of cultures. My mother was a native Mexican blend with a Spanish, and my father was a German. So Frida and Kahlo, my last name, comes from a German descendant.
When and where did you grow up?
Well, I was born, raised, and mostly I live all my life in La Casita Azul, is well known now, and it's in located in Coyoacan, Mexico. And I was born on July 6, 1907. But if you ask me, I will always tell you that I was born in 1910 just because it aligns with the Mexican Revolution. I am very interested in politics. So I like to align my birth year to the Mexican Revolution. It means something to me.
Very nice. What was your childhood like?
Well, my childhood was a little bit different than many of the kids. When I was 6, I was diagnosed with polio, which completely deformed my right leg, and it affected really hard my way of walking. That didn't stop my daddy to cheer me up to get into sports and to get in being active in school and all that. So it was a big, huge change in the way that I was living as a child. But it's still my dad always cheer me up to be involved in sports.
Right. I can imagine. What other areas of your life did your father influence you on?
Well, my father was my idol. I grew up looking up to him, and he was my first artistic inspiration because he was actually a photographer. So he was the first art that I was being able to see.
So you say your father was a photographer. How did this influence your artist career?
Well, in the beginning, his connections didn't really influence my art, but it did open the door to an education, which at the time period in Mexico, education was a privilege, especially for girls. And especially education was allowed only for people who can afford it. Which my father being a very famous photographer, our economy was stable enough that I was able to attend to school.
And what did you like to study when you were in school?
Well, I went to what equals to a high school level in here, which is a preparatory school in Mexico. And when I went in there, I went with the dreams of becoming a doctor. But actually, those years were gonna change my life because that's when I met Diego Rivera, and that's all I can remember of that time of school, if you ask me.
After preparatory school, there was a life-changing event that happened when you were 18. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I got into a deadly bus accident. I broke my ribs, my pelvis, my right leg got affected more. And after that, I had to go through like 30 and more medical operations and surgeries in order to recover. But the recovery of that's when I actually discovered my art because all of that time I was supposed to stay in bed rest, which I did. So then when that happened, my parents had to figure it out what to do to entertain me. So what I did is they bought an easel and put it on top of me and then put a mirror. So that was my way of doing art. So I was looking at the top and the only thing I can see was myself. So I started drawing self portraits.
What was your first serious work of art called?
Well, like I mentioned, like I told you, I was just laying down and all I can see was myself and draw paintings of myself. So what I consider my very serious art, it was a self-portrait that I call it a velvet dress.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually dedicated that to my boyfriend at the time, which we were broken up and I was trying to get him back with me. It didn't work out well.
Okay.
It was good for Diego though.
When did you discover your love for Diego?
Well, 7 years after I met him, we were already planning our wedding. That will be another event that will change my life forever. Because to start with, we were going against all the odds. My dear mother didn't approve of our wedding. She thought that Diego was too tall, too old, non-Christian, and on top of that, he was a communist. So he was not a good for me. She did not approve at all. She actually called us the elephant and the dove. Of course, he was the elephant and I was the dove.
I can imagine that being problematic, especially during the 1900s, having a communist husband. But you yourself were communist as well, weren't you, Frida?
Like I said, I was very interested in politics and I'm very outspoken because I just feel that we need a social change.
So, what was your marriage with him like?
At the beginning, it was a dream. But then after that, with the time, we went through a lot of challenges.
And this influenced your artist career, you'd say?
in every way you can think of.
So you married Diego Rivera. You guys had some challenges, but he was also an artist of himself, right?
Yes.
And so when did you become Frida the artist?
Well, first, let me tell you that it was really difficult because he was not only an artist, he was the artist. Like, he was the one. He was popular, he was well known, he had a really good name of himself, and he was wanted everywhere, especially here in the United States. But when I found out that art was a way to turn my suffering into a beautiful work of art, and I was able to never look back at that suffering, it was like an escape for me, like a healing. So then that's when I discovered art, like my passion and love for art.
Right. And there were also a lot of social boundaries going along with being married to a painter, right?
Oh, absolutely. My art was never noticed. Every time I was on a gallery or I tried to have an exhibition, I was not Frida the artist. I was Frida, the wife of Diego Rivera.
Critics say that your most significant work of art is the self-portrait with monkeys. Would you agree?
Well, I told you that all my art expresses something about me and what I'm experiencing on my life. But I can tell you that it's the highlight of my career because this this particular portrait was well known in France, and it opened the doors for me to actually have my own exhibit at a France in Paris, and I was the only first international woman to have an exhibit there, which it brought me. It opened the doors in my own home country. After that exhibit in France, I was now welcoming back to Mexico, and even in the United States. Now I was welcomed back as Frida, the artist, not Frida, the wife of Diego Rivera.
When you created your exhibits in Paris, you were grouped with a bunch of other artists. Can you name some of the other artists that were in there with you?
Well, I had the honor of meeting Pablo Picasso. That right there says a lot. He gave me actually some earrings. Oh, those are not the ones he gave me, but actually they are really famous. I have a portrait that I made and put some earrings that Pablo Picasso gave me. But I also met with other European artists, and they all became really good friends with me. And each one of them kind of like influenced me to perfect my art in some way, somehow. I learned from them too, and we became friends.
Frida, thank you so much for joining us today. We are really impressed with your work and fascinated with your life. We appreciate you taking the time to sit with us today and answer some of our questions.
Thank you for having Frida Kahlo and not the wife of Diego Rivera.
Hey everyone, I'm Libba Beaucham, and I'm really excited to be here with Diana Mancilla now, no longer Frida Kahlo. Diana, that was so much fun to have you and Carmen go through questions as Frida Kahlo, but I'm curious about your personal interest in her. So when were you introduced to Frida Kahlo, and what fascinates you about her in particular?
That she was just passionate. To me, she was passionate about everything, and that we can see through her artwork. She was not afraid. She was not afraid of the change. She opened the doors for a lot of women at the time. Nobody really speaks about that, about Frida, because everybody's so interested in her work. But if you go back in time and look at the time period that she was living in, and even in the interview, we mentioned that women were not really educated at that time if you didn't have a higher class status. So for her to do that and have education and then come back and being really active in politics for the lower class and for new laws or trying to strive to get some kind of like advantages for women and like to get freedom, just to have equality for everybody.
What do you think she did specifically for women in Mexico at her time?
By expressing herself alone, she was able to influence other women like, okay, this is enough. We can do things. We can be free. We can be ourselves. I like Frida herself is an expression of who she was. Like she didn't fake to be anybody. Since she was little, since she was in high school, she got into trouble. Like she started being in communist clubs and at a high school. So that right there tells us a lot. Like by women around her, like her friends. I can imagine if I was friends with Frida Kahlo, that would have changed my way of seeing things. Like if she's doing it, why I'm not doing it. And even right now, like if we look back at her paintings, we can actually see indigenous women. We can actually see some of the Mexican culture on it that not everybody talks about it. So that is influencing and opening doors to get to know culture, but from a woman's perspective. Like she was proud of herself. Like she loved herself. She loved who she was, and that's the beauty of her. She was not only passionate, like she showed that love comes in different ways and shapes. And that's another way that I can think she influences, especially women, because like you said, we are so typically to put a woman in a box, like saying you need to look like this.
Right.
She didn't look like, at all like the woman of her times. If anything, she used the traditional dresses and the way the Mexican culture, indigenous people dress. But other than that, she was not the stereotype of what you would define of a woman of her class in that time period.
Yeah, so to have all of those self-portraits and to really exude all of that confidence, to exude all of her culture that was so important to her. I'm curious if her communist ideology ever presented itself in her artwork explicitly. Was there any political tone to her artwork?
So there is a portrait, like one of my favorite portraits of Frida Kahlo is the El vestido cuelga ahí, and it's the red dress hangs in there. It's a indigenous dress in the middle of the New York City. So that it's more political because she's describing herself how she feels, but she's also showing the political way that the United States is moving to industrialization at the time. So I will say paintings like that portray a little bit of how she feels about the industrialization movement at the time and how she feels of the lower classes and they being treated, but not really a communist. Uh, I would say that that was more of a Diego job.
Okay. And I'm pretty curious about her relationship with Diego Rivera. Do you feel that he influenced her artwork in any way?
Absolutely. Diego Rivera gave her the big changes of her lives and the big feelings of her lives. Like the way that she felt, it had everything to do with Diego. There's a painting of her that it's called the Two Fridas. In that painting, it was done right after her divorce with Diego. So it actually shows like there's two Fridas, like the Frida that Diego would love and the Frida that it's well known in France and it has been adapted to new culture and it has made new names and everything. But that Frida, it's connected to the other Frida and it's suffering and pain at heart. If you guys have a moment to look at that pain was done right after her divorce. And if you know that before looking at the painting, you will see it differently because you can feel paint, and it was the pain that she was going through, Diego.
Now, you mentioned that she likes to say that she was born in 1910 because that's when the Mexican Revolution happened. Can you talk to us about the big events that were happening in Mexico during her lifetime? Was it a volatile time? Was it a time of growth for Mexico? What was going on?
Well, it was a lot of chaos going on in Mexico at that time. It was like the rise of communism waves outside of Mexico, but they were coming to Mexico because of the whole movement of the industrialization going on. So there was a lot of protests and marchings and showings of how people was unhappy, especially how the lower class was living, how the indigenous people were being treated and not having like the same sources as other classes it was like within industrialization it was like a lot of people, the middle classes were just getting wealthier and the lower classes were losing absolutely everything. So that was the type of Frida Kahlo movements, like marchings, protestings. It was really something like that. But it all had to do with that movement. Mexico really didn't went into a big, huge platform of revolution with her involved in it. She just was part of the movement, and she was very vocal. So she kind of like make a figure representation, kind of.
Now, did she ever face a significant backlash or even violence for her beliefs?
at some point in all this chaos that was happening outside of Mexico, they had a guest from a communist party that it was a very influential guest. So one day, her house, they wake up to shootings and stuff because they were trying to arrest this person that it was being persecuted in another country.
Wow. So she did put herself in some danger for
Yes.
her political beliefs.
Yes, because they had a refugee from a communist party, and he was a very big picture and very important person.
Yeah. And I guess to conclude, what is the one thing that you wish everybody knew about Frida Kahlo?
Frida Kahlo saw beauty differently. Beauty for her was differently, and she was passionate about it. She was true to herself, and if I can be true to myself and be myself, then I can definitely impact somebody else's life because she did it.
Well, thank you so much, Diana. I really enjoyed your portrayal of Frida, and thank you so much for bringing her story to our members. And thank you, members, for watching today. And I wonder if there are specific paintings or maybe even resources that you know that you'd like to suggest. What would be some good further reading, or are there good documentaries that our members can watch?
They're really good documentaries. As a matter of fact, there's one PBS has one really good one that I check it out sometimes at the library. It's in every public library. Just go and ask. That's the only documentary they have in this area, Gainesville and Howe County. Also, if you just go on the internet and especially YouTube, they have, but be careful. just try to check your sources. But nowadays you can find a lot of materials about Frida Kahlo. If you can get into any website that is educational, you will get more like a secure information, a real information.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And we will see you next time for our Wednesday live stream and next Friday for our next members live stream. Take care.
Bye.